Welcome to this week's episode of Getting Real. I am your host, Monick Halm. And on this show, we talk about just real issues around real estate investing, authentic stories, and just what gets in the way, right? And on today's show, we're going to talk about understanding real estate investment returns and key terms and with simple analogies because I know a lot of people, especially women, get really hung up because they do not understand the jargon, the terminology, and it can get confusing and overwhelming. And I get it. I don't want anyone investing in anything they don't understand or are confused about, don't feel good about. Don't do that. If you don't understand what you're investing in, don't invest. But hopefully we can help you understand what it is you're investing in, understand what these terms mean so you can make smarter investment decisions. It's important to know and understand the rules of the game in order to win the game. But you have to understand what these things mean. So today I want to talk about some investment terms that are helpful to know that you'll come across and you'll see often when people are talking about real estate. I want to explain it, and I want to explain it in a way that's super easy. I actually went on Chat GPT and I said, can you help me? Can you give me an example for these terms that would make sense to a 5-year-old? So I am going to share because some of these are a little hard to wrap your mind around. So hopefully with these ways of explaining these terms that at least chat says a kindergartner will understand, you'll get it. And if you don't understand, please ask in ask me, let me know, and try to explain it in a way that makes sense because you need to understand what people are talking about so that you can really evaluate potential opportunities. All right, so let's get into it. And these are terms that people ask me about all the time, and I have and we have an investor club at REI Goddesses. If you go to my website reigoddesses.com, you click on Investor Club, you'll get into a conversation with me, and the Investor Club is basically just a way for women or anyone who's part of our investor club to get access to investing opportunities that generally are limited to very high net worth individuals or people who are in the know, used to be part of this old boys network. And if you're part of that, then you got access to these types of deals. And I started the investor club because I wanted to broaden the people that had access to this, right? But when you get these types of opportunities, or really any opportunity, there are terms that will show up, and if you don't know, you're not going to know what they mean. So we're going to talk about those today. And so the ones that we're going to talk about today are cap rates. We're going to explain cap rate, cash on cash return, IRR, internal rate of return, annualized return, equity multiple. Those are things you're going to see a lot of, and if you don't know what any of those mean, you are in the right place. Okay, because that's what we're going to talk about. So the first one we're going to talk about is cap rate or capitalization rate, and um, and people will often talk. It's like, what's the cap rate on that? What's the cap on that? Oh, it's a 5 cap or it's a 10 cap. Oh, I got this thing. It's a 7 cap. And if you don't know what a cap rate is or what that means, you're going, oh, great, that's a 7 cap. I don't know what that is. So a cap rate is, and I had chat give me an explanation um, of the for a kindergartner. And here's how it chat suggested, a kindergartner would understand it. The cap rate is like figuring out how much your toy car makes if you rent it out to your friends. It shows how much money you make compared to what it costs. Or how much, it's how much money your investment property will make compared to the cost, the value that was part of this formula. And there's a formula that is basically the combination of the cap rate. It's like if you know the cap rate and the net operating income, you can figure out the value. So those three things, the cap rate. And here, I'll give you another analogy, a lemonade stand. So imagine you have a lemonade stand and you make $10 from selling lemonade after buying lemons and sugar, right? After your expenses, you have $10 of profit. It costs you $100 to set up your stand. So you're making $10 on your $100 investment. Your cap rate is 10%. That means, or in other words, every dollar you spend, you get 10 cents back. We're talking about real estate. If you buy a property for $1 million, right? The value of the property is $1 million, and you're getting back in profit. This is your net operating income. NOI, you often see that term. Net operating income is your income after expenses. All expenses except for, does not count, this does not include expenses for a mortgage, does not include your expense for, or something called debt service, for you to pay for the loan. It also doesn't include expenses for what is called capital expenditures, so, or capex. You'll hear that term. So capex is like what you'd spend. So say you're buying a property and you have to redo the kitchens, right? If you're redoing the kitchens you bought an 8-unit property and you have to redo all the kitchens. That's not an ordinary expense. That's kind of like a extraordinary expensive. So those types of expenses aren't part of the NOI. So the NOI is your gross operating income, the income you receive, minus ordinary expenses, right? Property management, taxes, insurance, paying, regular maintenance, that kind of thing. So after those expenses, you have your net operating income, and then it's your net operating income, uh, divided by the amount of money you've put into the property. Right. So property earns 100,000 in profit. It's $1 million property. The cap rate is 10%. All right. So that's cap rate. Now, people will often think that, so the higher your cap rate, the higher your return on investment, right? And the higher the cap rate, sort of an inverse, the less expensive the property is relative to how much money you're making. So when the cap rate goes up, the price goes down. When the cap rate goes down, the price goes up. And so people often think that, oh, if I have a higher cap rate, it's a better investment, right? Because I'm making more money back. And that's not necessarily true. Sometimes higher cap rates is higher risk. Not always, but the cap rate will be a function of what's happening in the market. And so certain markets, LA is a very expensive market, you're going to have lower cap rates, or you're going to have less of a return on your money in a market like Los Angeles or New York or San Francisco, as opposed to other markets that are cheaper, say Columbus, Ohio, or Jackson, Mississippi. Right, so you're going to have a higher cap rate. So that's what cap rate means. Hopefully that makes sense. Another definition, another type of return that you're going to hear people talk about is called the cash on cash return. Sometimes you'll see it as COC, um, or C-O-C, cash on cash return. So that's basically the cash you make every year on your cash invested. This is this is your basically the yearly amount of money you're getting back from the amount of from what you've put in. This was the kid analogy that chat gave. So if you put $10 in your piggy bank and you earn well, this earn $2 more from allowances. If you not quite, but your cash on cash return is 20%. You've earned 20 cents for every dollar you saved. In real estate, if you invest 100,000 in a property and you earn 10,000 per year in rental income, your cash on cash return is 10%. So for every dollar you invest, you're making 10 cents back per year. That's your cash on cash return. So that's like a yearly cash flow on cash invested. All right. So that's a common term you're going to see. Another term that you will see is let's talk about I'll talk about it. There's one I didn't say I was going to talk about, but I'm going to talk about cumulative then annualized returns. So, and it's really important that you understand what returns are. So when somebody asks you what kind of returns are you looking for, that's kind of a tricky question because these are all different ways of talking about returns. So a cumulative return is basically the return that you're going to make overall, right? So if you invest $100,000 in a property, right? And by the time you sell it, right, or by the time that you exit, you have gotten your money back plus another $100,000, right? So you've doubled your money. That's your cumulative return. Would be 100%, right? So you've put in 100,000, you got another 100,000. It's 100% return. If you put in 100,000, you got 50,000 of profit back plus your 100,000 back. That would be a 50% cumulative return, right? So that's overall return. Oftentimes people will talk about annualized return. So that's taking the whole amount and then dividing it by the number of years of the investment. So if you put in 100,000 and you get your 100,000 back plus an extra 100,000, right? That's 100% cumulative return. And you've gotten, and it took 5 years to get that money back. That is, you divide the 100,000 by 5, like the number of years, and that is a 20, it would be 20 or 20% annualized. So it's 20% per year. Now, if it's 100%, but you've had it in that investment for 10 years, not 5, 10 years, so you would divide that 100% by 10, then it's a 10% annualized return. If it's been 2 years, right, it'd be 50% annualized return. It's just the overall divided by the number of years. And the analogy for the 5-year-old, they said, if you score 100 points one year, I feel like this is this is a confusing example, but maybe it makes sense to you. This is what chat says for annualized return. Video game score analogy. If you score 100 points one year, 120 the next, 150 the third, annualized return tells you the average score you earn each year. You can do that. I like looking at total, right? So that would be 100 plus 120 plus 150. So that would, you would have 370 points. You would divide that by 3, 370 divided by 3. That would be your returns. your annualized return. 37, nine. All right. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. Um, so that is annualized, right? Cumulative is your overall, annualized overall divided by the number of years. Okay. And equity multiple, this tells you how many times over your initial investment you made back. So again, this example where you put in 100,000, you got 100,000 back. So now you put in 100,000, and at the end of this, you have 200,000. So your equity multiple is a 2x, right? So you've doubled your money. If you put in 100,000 and you got 150,000 back, it's a 1.5x, right? So you've multiplied, that's 100,000, you get back 300,000. That's a 3x, right? So it's basically how many times your money has, by what percentage your money has multiplied. Their analogy for kids: if you spend $10 on a toy, you made $25 from it, you could buy the toy 2.5 times over. The equity multiple is 2.5x. Right? So that's the equity multiple. So that you're going to hear, okay, this investment, it's a 2x return. The annualized, it's 20% annualized. The cash on cash is 10%. All right, so now you're starting to understand, okay, so the cash on cash, that's how much money I'm getting back every year. The cumulative is how much I'm getting back total. Annualized is how it divides up year by year. Now, why might the cash on cash be different than the overall? So the cash on cash is how much you're getting back every year in just the running of the property. But when we're looking at overall, we're also factoring in what you get when you sell it or when you exit. So let's say you've put money into a syndication, $100,000 into a syndication, and over and it has a 5-year hold. It's giving back 10% cash on cash. So every year on your $100,000, you're getting 10,000. That's your 10% cash on cash. At the end of 5 years, it sells, and you get back. So you've gotten 50,000 in cash on cash. Plus, when it sells, you get another 50,000 plus your initial $100,000 investment. So at this point, you've gotten back 100,000 of profit plus your initial 100,000. So you've made 100% cumulative return. They've held it for 5 years. It's been 5%. 20% annualized. So you take the 100 divided by 5. So that's 20% annualized, right? 10% cash on cash, 20% annualized, 100% cumulative. Your equity multiple is 2x because you started with 100, you came out with 200, 2x return. So there's one other type of return I want to explain. And this is one that we'll often hear, and it's called the IRR. And this is the internal rate of return. And this is looking at it's a time weighted return, right? So it's factoring in when you're getting the money back. And the reason why this is important is because a dollar today is worth more because of inflation, right? Your dollar today is worth more than it will be worth tomorrow, a year from now, 5 years from now. So the IRR factors in that timing. So it's looking at how fast your money is growing. So in this, here's the example I gave for kids, apple garden analogy. You plant seeds that grow 10 apples the first year, 12 the next, 15 the third. The IRR is like finding out the average speed your apples grow each year. More or less, right? So when in our example here, well, invested $100,000 in a syndication. We've gotten 10,000 back every year, cash on cash. And then there's on year 5, at the end of the year, the sale, you got another 50,000 back. So that's a 100% return, 20% annualized. The IRR is going to be less than that because you're factoring in that 10,000 you get in year 1 is worth more than the 10,000 in year 2, which is worth more than the 10,000 in year 3, right? 60,000 of that money comes back in year 5. It comes back later. So you get the 50,000 at the end when it sells. You're getting that 10,000 in year 5 of cash on cash return plus the 50,000 from the sale. So that money is worth less than the money you get at the beginning. Hopefully that makes sense because money loses value over time because of inflation. So this IRR, even though annualized, you might be looking at 20% annualized, the IRR might be more like 17% IRR because it's worth a little less because you're getting more of it at the back end, not as much on the front end, right? And the longer that window would be, so maybe if it's over 10 years or 20 years, right, the IRR is going to come down. So it's looking at the timing of the money, and it's a good way to compare different deals because you're looking, okay, this is 3 years and this one's 7 years, and the IRRs are a good way to compare, make things more apple to apple comparison. Okay, so these are all different types of multiples, or sorry, different types of returns, different types of ways of talking about returns. And hopefully that makes sense because you are going to see these terms when you're looking at potential deals, especially if you're looking in the commercial side, or if you're interested in being part of a syndication. You're going to see those terms. You're going to see people talking about the cap rate. You're going to see people, and I want to make, and the cap rate is your return, and the cap rate is important, really 2 times. So the cap rate when you're buying, but also the cap rate when you're selling. Right? So when you hold it, it's what's more important is the cash on cash return, which you're getting back, but the cap rate upon when you're evaluating a deal, you want to pay attention to what the projection is on the cap rate upon sale, because it will make a big difference in terms of the value, and you want to look at how conservative that is. And this is a whole other conversation. And I'm going to, I am here and around and friendly. So DM me in Facebook or LinkedIn, and I'm happy, or go, or get into the REI Goddesses, go to the investor clubs, sign up, and we'll have a conversation where we can talk about this. And I'm happy to answer your questions and find out about you and your goals. You can be on the list to just find out about opportunities, and I can go more deeply into this conversation with you, because it is, and I'll put in the chat. Well, first I'm going to put 2 things in the chat. So one is I want to share with you all the $1 million net worth activation snapshot. So this is to help you figure out, this is some really cool tools to help you figure out your net worth, where you are now, what assets you have available to you now that you could use to invest in real estate. And the other thing I'm going to post is I'm going to put in the the link for the Investor Club so that you can sign up for a conversation there. Okay. And we can go deeper into it, and I can answer any of your questions about, about this, because it's important to understand. It's not rocket science. Hopefully, these little examples help make it easier to understand, those kid-friendly examples. But if you still are having a hard time wrapping your head around it, totally understand. I could have a longer conversation about what those are, what those mean, right? And what's important for you when you're looking at opportunities and evaluating them. So that is our getting real on investment terms, on terms for returns on investment. And we're going to end with a trinity. And I would love it if you're here, share your trinity, which is a brag, what you're celebrating, a gratitude, and a desire. So what do I brag? I have this every year, and every week, and then for some reason I always forget to think about what am I going to brag about. Let's see. I brag. What do I brag? I brag that I have been learning how to do something really cool. It's called wave skiing. It's a little bit like a surfboard meets a kayak, and so I'm learning to wave ski, and I went a couple times this past weekend, and I'm catching some pretty amazing waves. I mean, I've been also watching the Olympics. Nothing like that. Those are like little teeny baby waves I've been catching compared, but having a lot of fun. So I just brag and celebrate getting into the ocean with my husband and friends and learning something new and being brave, because it does take some courage to face the ocean and those big waves. So that's what I brag, and I'm grateful for. I'm grateful for my friend Nico, who's teaching me. He's a friend that, gosh, an old friend. We met 21 years ago now in Argentina. Now he lives here, and he's introduced me to wave ski. I'm actually borrowing his wave ski while we go, and he's been teaching me. So I'm super grateful to him. And I desire, I desire, as always, just more women who are investing in real estate, especially in these commercial deals, these bigger deals, and they are accessible, especially if you're going to be part of a syndication. You're only taking a piece of it. It's accessible to everyone, and I desire more and more women to participate. So that is it for this episode of Getting Real. Thank you for joining me. Let's get real, stay real, and get yourself some real estate. Bye-bye.